Good morning and welcome as we start a new sermon series this week. The series is Instructions That Are Hard to Hear, and our part today is Be Anxious for Nothing. And it's from the Gospel of Luke, our scripture, the 12th chapter, picking up with the 22nd verse through the 34th verse. Then Jesus said to his disciples, "Therefore I say to you, don't worry about your life, what you will eat, or about your body, what you will wear. There is more to life than food, and more to the body than clothing. Consider the ravens. They neither plant nor harvest. They have no silo or barn, yet God feeds them. You are worth so much more than birds. Who among you, by worrying, can add a single moment to your life? If you can't do such a small thing, why worry about the rest? Notice how the lilies grow. They don't wear themselves out with work. They don't spin cloth. But I say to you that even Solomon, in all his splendor, wasn't dressed like one of these. If God dresses grass in the field so beautifully, even though it's alive today and tomorrow it's thrown into the furnace, how much more will God do for you, you people of weak faith? Don't chase after what you will eat and what you will drink. Stop worrying. All the nations of the world long for these things. Your Father knows that you need them. Instead, desire His kingdom, and these things will be given to you as well. Don't be afraid, little flock, because your Father delights in giving you the kingdom. Sell your possessions and give to those who need. Make for yourselves wallets that don't wear out, a treasure in heaven that never runs out. No thief comes near there, and no moth destroys. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be too." Verse 26, as I was reading through that, a thought that popped in my head: if you can't do such a small thing, why worry about the rest? And you're chuckling, aren't you, about me? um,
Yeah.
it prompted me to think about, or to remember, um, I can't remember where this was, but the saying was that there are two rules that you have to live by. And the first rule was, uh, don't sweat the small things. And the second one is, they're all small things. And yet we expend a lot of effort along that lines. One of my former co-workers when I worked at Xerox, Ken Suffin, um, he had a way of calming the storm, I think is the best way to put it. In the service business, you run with peaks and valleys. There are times when there's not hardly anything to do, and then there's times when the floodgate opens up and it seems like everybody in Roanoke has placed a service call at the same time. And some of my coworkers, I have to confess that sometimes I was among them, not always, but sometimes. Um, it was our practice to gather together for lunch. And some of my coworkers would get really, really upset about how are we going to do all of this. And Ken would just sit there and just quietly say, "Well, why don't we just sit here and worry about it for another hour, and maybe the service calls will go away." And of course they weren't going away, and his implication was, well, the only way they're going away is if we get up off our tails and go do something. Um, and I and I think that's the essence of what Jesus has to say here. This passage is from the Gospel of Luke. There's a similar passage in Matthew in what we know of the Sermon on the Mount. And this is part of Luke's version of the Sermon on the Mount, or his teaching for Jesus. Barclay, the little bit of wisdom that I gleaned from him, as I said, he was focusing on Christ, and two observations that he said observed is that Jesus never saw beyond himself, and never beyond this world.
Say that again.
That Jesus, in his ministry, that he never saw, his vision was never beyond himself, and it was never beyond this world. Now, he pointed us to a time to come, but his ministry, the actions of his life, focused on the here and on our in this world. And when he teaches about the kingdom, that the kingdom of heaven has come near and the kingdom is now here, he's teaching us that to live in a righteous relationship with God, that we are living in the kingdom, and that it's not a time to come, it's here and now. But it's here and now if we make it here and now, but by the way that we adopt our lives and how we go about living. Jesus' concern seems to have been linked to idolatry, and that the being anxious, that empowers temptation. And Jesus' attitude was, well, then so why do it? Why be anxious if we're going to be tempted from it? And that we are rich in our relationship, because of our relationship with God, that we are rich beyond anything that the world materially can bestow upon us. Also, as I was reading through this and thinking about it, there was an individual that came to my mind. Do you remember Albert Gingrich? Albert and Connie were a part of this congregation in his retirement. At the time that they came to be here at Main Street, I can't remember what the agency's called now, but one of the conference agencies owns homes that are available to retired clergy that don't have the means to provide a home from themselves. A home, they can apply, and these homes are available on a case-by-case basis, rent-free, for these individuals to live in. There was such a home here in Bedford at one time. It was somehow it was jointly owned between this congregation and this conference corporation. It's no longer here because the conference didn't want to be in a joint ownership, and the house was disposed of. But Albert and Connie lived in that house while they were here in Bedford until their health had started to fail. At Albert's funeral, which was held here at Main Street, a pastor in the Lynchburg area gave a testimony about how Albert lived his life. Now, if you knew Albert and Connie, they lived very simply. The suits that Albert wore had been around the block quite a few times. The cars he drove were cars that had many, many miles on them. In fact, at one time he owned two Volvos. One he kept up on blocks in the backyard for parts to keep the other one going. And he would be out there repairing it himself. But the testimony that was given about Albert at his funeral was that when Albert and Connie retired in this area, this man had went to Albert and he offered him a job with his congregation because he knew that money was tight for them. And Albert turned him down and said no, he didn't need it. And then a couple years later, Albert came back, called this pastor, and wanted to know if he still had a job that he might do. And he was more than happy to provide for him, and made him a minister of visitation for the congregation. And after he had been doing this for a while, he asked Albert, he said, "What changed your mind? Why are you willing to do this now, and you wouldn't do it when I first asked you?" And Albert's reply was that he had recently met a man who needed a car, and the only way that Albert could figure out to get him a car was for him to go to work and earn the money and buy the car for this man, which he did. As far as I could tell, Albert and Connie did not worry about earthly possessions in any shape or form. And I think that his life models what Jesus is saying here about not being concerned about day to day. Now, there are some things that I think that we have to be careful not to read into this. When it says, when he compares us to the ravens, that they don't sow, they don't have silos or barns, and yet God feeds them. Does that mean that we're not to make any provisions for ourselves? Does that mean we're not to plant a garden? Or take the produce from a garden and put it aside to have at a later time?
Are you asking that question?
I'm posing that question, right?
Well, I don't think so. I think it's just an illustration, and illustrations aren't made to be taken to their absolute limits. You're supposed to get one message out of them, which in that case is, don't worry.
Right.
But still do what you can, get a job.
Yeah, right. It doesn't say not to get a job. It
Well,
just says don't worry.
the deal with landowners back then is that you overplanted more than what you would use, with the idea of leaving stuff in the field for the wayfarer, sojourner, the poor that could come out and harvest a handful of grain here and there. The deal was that you planted more than what you actually needed, and take care of other people that you may never came in contact with, but they had the ability to go to the edge of the field and get some grain for their personal use as substance to keep themselves alive. Just like the raven, they didn't plant, but yet somebody had to provide grain to be planted for them to go harvest what they could eat, and they would only take what they needed. Same way with the poor, they only took what they really needed in order to survive, and that's more like today. Like with our blessing box and all, people are taking actually what they actually need to survive, and as long as we keep stuff in the blessing box or provide wood in the winter for them to keep warm, or clothes, or knit hats and stuff that's going in the blessing box during cold weather, they're taking what they need in order to survive. And nowadays, that's a part of living, is surviving.
I think it goes on to compare the value of people versus the birds, right? God values people more. And I think it just goes to say, like you say, it gives the ability to care for ourselves and plant the garden and preserve food and give to others.
Because I always plant extra, because I know I'm going to give it away. Whether it's for the Brunswick stew, or for my chili, or, just give away to neighbors, whatever. And they do the same. They plant other stuff that I don't plant.
Yeah.
So we're forever sharing back and forth in our neighborhood of stuff that one person has grown it, they like it. I grow stuff I like, and we just, divvy it up between, people up there the street.
Are you the zucchini guy?
No. Not squash either.
Or broccoli.
But the next door neighbor does, he loves that kind of stuff.
I can't remember which one of the comic strip characters, but there was one of the comic strips used to really get into the zucchinis, about people growing zucchinis and they're coming out their ears and leaving bags on doorsteps anonymously. What you were referring to, Roger, about planting more than you need, that was a twofold instruction. It was not only to overplant, but on the harvest, make sure you didn't harvest it all.
Right, leave it.
Leave it in there.
Sounds like harvest of hope to me.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The mechanized farming that we have today isn't able to get into the corners of the field.
Right.
And so there are harvests left in the fields just by virtue of the automation that's being done. And I saw some articles in the past couple of weeks. I believe John Deere has been working along this line of autonomous tractor control, that you program your tractor to do something in the field, you turn it on and the tractor goes off and does what you programmed it to do.
They do that now. You watch the
without
rural stuff on RFD TV. They have 11-year-old kid sitting up there, and he's got his arms folded and riding in the tractor. The computer's driving the tractor.
We got a sweeper
And
like that.
within, they say almost a quarter mile of the field, it's within a quarter inch of being accurate on whatever the row is planting or harvesting. And the kid is just sitting there watching the computer, and they talk about he was gonna be such a great farmer in his future. It's all computerized even now. They're sitting back and teaching the kids to run a computer. Okay, they got a $500,000 piece of machinery being operated by a 10 or 11-year-old, and the computer's doing the driving. He's just sitting in there riding.
Well, they're talking about, he doesn't even have to sit in there and ride.
Right, it really doesn't. And the computers that makes it turn around and go back the other way.
As an
It's
advocate
unbelievable.
for children, I think that's pretty stupid. Suppose he fell off.
Well, he's inside enclosed, his
Oh,
air
right.
conditioning.
Children never
heated.
Don't worry.
Children never do anything. No, that's not a worry. That's a sensible.
Some fact, but they're sitting inside, it's better than your
No,
automobile.
Unless there's an adult in there with him, he is either trapped if there's an accident, or kids are kids, and he'll find a way to get out if he wants to.
Take this thing to school, huh?
Or
Yeah.
fiddle with the program.
Well, another place is where they flood the fields for irrigation. The fields are so flat, the water can be an inch thick all the way across the whole field. It's not like 6 to 8 inches on one part and 2 feet over, it's over down here like the grade is so flat that they can open up a canal and the water runs down there and let it stay, say open a half a day, and it would be like an inch, inch and a half over the whole field by the end of the day, just for the irrigation purpose. They don't have to do the sprayer thing and all that kind of stuff. Out in California, the same way. That's how they raise all those nut trees and stuff out there. We've been through there, and fields are flatter than this table. I couldn't believe it. And they have like a raised 1 foot edge all the way around it, and that water stays in that one plot. And they'll go and do another plot another day. And it's several acres at that, in a plot. Walnut trees, dates and all that
Well,
stuff.
Jesus is, as Jenny pointed out earlier, a lot of Jesus's teaching is exaggeration to make the point, hyperbole. And I think that there's a part of that at work here. And the point is that God's going to provide for us what we need in a right relationship with Him. And that we shouldn't spend a lot of energy worrying about how things are going to work themselves out there. Well, I hope you'll join us at worship later on this morning as Pastor Dawn begins this new series about dealing with hard lessons, instructions that are hard to hear. May God's blessings be upon you.